Welcome back, wonderful people. We're now on video 2 for chapter 5. We had discussed the 3 objectives of the economy. We discussed gross domestic product, gross national product, did a little bit of a comparison. And now we're going to discuss how to measure the GDP. Now there's a lot more information in some of it in other videos, some of it in your outline, definitely in your homework and on the exercises. So it's all that combined that really gets you to where you need to be, where you are solid about this material. When we talk about measuring the GDP, we're talking about the 4 sectors in an economy and each one having its own expenditure. First, again, language. These are, what are they called? They're called expenditures. Don't compare it or confuse it with expenses. We're not talking about an expense. An expense is like, you buy new shoes, that's an expense. You eat out, that's an expense. We're talking about the expenditures, all of them put together, right? I should probably add an S here. Total expenditures. So what we're talking about now is how to measure the GDP. Now, in an economy, there are 4 sectors. They're down here. You have the household sector. That's you and I, the people who are buying refrigerators and cars and groceries, right? Then you have the business sector. These are the business owners. These are the corporations. These are the partnerships, the proprietorships. That's the business sector. Then you have the government sector. Clearly, we know what that means. And whether it is, like a locality, whether it is a municipality, in other words, whether it's a state government, whether it's a federal government, it's all government. And then you have the foreign sector. This is the one students forget. And when I ask them about it, they act like they've never heard of it in their lives. So foreign sector is the one that has to do with everything that is either being made here and sold outside the United States or made outside the United States and being bought inside it. Now, each one of these sectors has a corresponding expenditure. Let's go back to the expenditures. There are 4 of them. What are they called again? Expenditures. I'm sorry to drive you crazy, but these are the mistakes that I often encounter and I want to stem them early. So the household sector has the consumption expenditure. It's symbolized by a C. You see it up here, C. The business sector has the investment expenditure, symbolized by an I. The government sector, this is the most creative one of all. It's also called government and it's symbolized by a G. And the foreign sector is called net exports. And net exports is exports minus imports. That's how we come up with it. So if you have 300 billion coming in, for instance, in imports, and you have 200 billion going out in exports, and you do 200 minus 300, you have a negative 100 billion in net exports. All that stuff, again, is in your outlines. I also have other videos on it, just not part of this PowerPoint specifically, because I just told you what it is. Now, how do we figure this out? It's really quite simple. The GDP equals total expenditures. We're just adding them up. Equals C plus I plus G plus an E. Consumption tends to be a positive for us. Investments is a positive. Government is a positive. Net exports tends to be a negative. I will tell you right now, this is not a bad thing. Sometimes I hear people saying things like, oh my God, we have a trade deficit. When net exports is a negative, like it actually is in reality, then it's either called a trade deficit, or it's called a net import, or it's called a negative net export. I find a trade deficit or a net import to be more common how it's actually phrased. So why does this happen? I'm going to tell you right now. It happens for 2 predominant reasons. It means the country is stronger, wealthier. It can afford higher prices. It can also mean that you are looking at a stronger currency. So when a nation has stronger currency or a nation has more wealth, this nation, higher income, this nation is very much likely to actually end up being a nation that has a negative net export or a net import or a trade deficit. Now, they all mean the same thing. So here's a sample. This is as close as I can get it to reality for us. So we're looking at that 25 trillion for our GDP. About 70% of that is consumption, right here, the household sector. When we buy houses, clothes, vehicles, insurance, dental appointments, buy glasses, all the things that you can think of that make up the your life of what you buy and what you need is going to go into consumption. That's about 70%. It could be maybe closer to 69%, but just for whole numbers, we're going to say 70. The second one, investments up here, right here, is 18%. That means when businesses are purchasing in an economy, anything that has to do with supplies, insurance, real estate, it's all going in here, in investments. Now, you and I, when we talk about investing in the stock market, I don't want you to think of it as investments. We're going to call that savings, and that's coming up in the future. But the word investment really implies the business sector, not you and I doing anything for our retirements or just because we're interested in investing. It's businesses and what they do. The third one is government. Government spends approximately 17%. So when people talk about marginalizing the government, they're talking about shrinking the economy significantly. They're almost the same weight. I mean, if you actually look at the actual numbers, you may find that they're almost the same. They don't vary by a huge percentage. So shrinking what the government does, as far as, the government is a massive buyer, right? The government does things like it runs the military, it buys things for the military. The government pays wages. You might have a job in government. STCC belongs to the state of Massachusetts. That's a government expense or an investment. They kind of combine together. It's an expenditure, right? Anytime we have the snow removed, anytime we have a bridge repaired, anytime we use the airport, there are so many reasons of how the government ends up being part of the economy as far as how it contributes to the economy. And the last one is net exports. So here's what you're thinking. There are two businesses involved. Domestic businesses is right here in investments. We just don't have to use the word domestic. It's implied. And this is a foreign business. This is still business. These two are businesses. One deals with Americans and what's happening inside the economy, and one deals with either sending a product elsewhere or importing a product from somewhere else. So these two comprise businesses, the government, and you and I. And the money circulates between them. That's that circular flow chart that you have in your outline or in your textbook that basically shows you this. And I'm going to run through it with you very quickly. Businesses, these two, hire individuals. They pay them salaries, right? We take our salary, we pay some of it in taxes to the government, and we also buy goods and services from these into this type of businesses, the foreign and the domestic. So we're returning money to them. Then the government takes taxes from the businesses and the individuals, like I said a minute ago, and then it gives it back to them because the government gives us public goods. The government might subsidize us. I mean, we all got payments, for instance, during the COVID crisis, or it could be a different kind of subsidy, like state college is cheaper than a private college because the tuition is subsidized. So it gives it back. Same thing with businesses. They get subsidies, they get endowments, they get grants. So the government gives it back to us, and then the cycle repeats. So you see, it's like money coming in and out and multiplying and growing and multiplying. We'll talk about the multiplication when we talk about the spending multiplier in the future. This is basically our GDP and how we come up with it. I'm going to stop right here and start video number 3.